Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amna Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen. On today's episode and discussion of racism in the United Kingdom, the work that's being done to counteract that racism, and what you can do as well to help aid in these efforts. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, with the death of George Floyd and his killing, the rampant police brutality in the United States, we saw protests across the nation demanding justice, not just for George Floyd, but for all those who are victims of police brutality. But not only in the United States did we see these marches and protests, but across the globe, particularly in the United Kingdom. For instance, with the case of Shukri Abdi, we saw people on the streets demanding justice for her family, something that has still not been served. But there are so many like George Floyd in the United Kingdom and across the world who we are marching for, who we are protesting for. And today we'll be speaking more about racism in the UK, what we can do to help and what we can do to get involved. We're hearing from two young activists today. First, we have with us Natasha March, who has earned her MA in Human Rights distinction level and has worked with youth offenders in literacy programs. Her future goal is to complete her PhD in Black and Indigenous human rights, as well as work in the Caribbean in politics to demand slave reparations. Thank you so much, Natasha, for being with us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Amnia.
No, it's totally an honor for us to have you today. Natasha, a lot of your work focuses on decolonization, on slave reparations, and with these protests, with, kind of this revolutionary environment that many are explaining that we are in currently. Do you think we're one step closer to that, decolonization, one step closer to those slave reparations, or where are we at? Tell me about that.
I think that we're at a thought. I think we're at a seed. We have been talking about this forever, since slavery. I think what's happened this time is a shift in consciousness for everyone. Whereas before it was just Black and brown people shifting their consciousness. Now white allies are coming together too. And I think what's very apparent with the BLM that happened in England, we didn't just have Black and brown people from African Caribbean descent. We had Middle Eastern people. We had people it was more color, Black and brown, because we all understand what it is to have racism in the UK. It doesn't matter what country you're from. If you're Black and brown in England, you're probably going to get racism. So it's starting with a thought and a seed. And thank goodness that we have strong academic language to use these thoughts and seeds to progress in this country about decolonizing the system. And it's getting there. It's getting there with the thoughts, white people getting their heads around it. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. I think we are having people start to recognize their privilege. We're definitely not there yet in terms of systemically, because this is a systemic issue. And in order to get to the root of this issue, you're right, it's going to take time. But we're seeing that little seed, and hopefully that gives us a bit of hope and hope to the people who have been working, and have dedicated their whole life to this, have dedicated decades toward this work. So hopefully we are seeing, that little seed, and we have to work to nurture that seed and grow. And we have with us our next activist. I think it's a perfect time to bring her in because she has been supporting some of the marches that you're speaking about, some of these protests as well. Aliza Hamid, a passionate young Muslim woman who speaks up for the oppressed and addresses these world kind of crises and hopes to be a voice for those who aren't given a voice and educate those who aren't educated. She is an avid supporter of the Manchester March and is a young activist. Thank you so much, Aliza.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have both of you, two young women who have dedicated so much of their life to this work and hope to do that in the future as well. But Aliza, what I want to ask you, and you as well, Natasha, is what inspires the work that you do?
I think growing up, as a British young Muslim woman, I've experienced racism throughout my whole life. And what's particularly, touched me in my heart is about how it's accepted in both society and within, our culture. It's kind of growing up, you're told you are going to get treated different and you have to accept it. I've never been the type of person to sit down and just allow that. I wasn't happy with that at all, and it kind of fueled me a little bit because I just thought it was wrong, and I've always wanted to do something, to fight for that.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that you allowed those experiences as a young person, and the fact that racism was normalized in your life and you use that as fuel to stand up is truly a phenomenal. And I want to applaud you on that because it does take courage and vulnerability. So thank you for that. But tell us, our audience who is mostly American, what is racism in the UK and how does it look like?
For me, sorry, Elisa.
It's okay, fine. Basically, I think as much as that, little comments and slurs as they're common throughout the whole world, but I think a lot of it is in public environments like schools as well. I've experienced a lot of people in cars shouting across, calling me a terrorist, making commenting on my hijab as well. And I think it's just about, sometimes I think it's a bit subconscious because they've grown up around that being normalized. I think it's the way that they're treated, and the things that they're taught, they kind of reflect that on us as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And Natasha, I saw you kind of jumping in, and I want to hear your take on racism as well in the UK.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because as a brown woman from African Caribbean descent, the racism that we used to get in the 80s was like Elisa's getting now. It was open, it was called out, it was in the street. Now, I always say that in Britain we have waves and they persecute different people. So the blacks were in the 80s and the 70s, bit of the 90s. And now if you see the most horrendous propaganda against Muslim people in this country, it's jaw-dropping. I don't watch the news because of it. And I think for people like myself, black women, they talk about on the news overweight black women. It's more subtle, actually. It's more discreet. As I said in the BLM speech, it's insidious. It's quiet. It's to do with your body language, how they stare at you, how they move out the way, how they tell your children off. They think they can tell your children off as black women because we have a history of them taking our children away in slavery. So there's that kind of ownership there. I wouldn't like to say what Muslim people go through in this country, but it sounds to me like it's what we went through when I was growing up. They could call you the N-word and get away with it. They can't do that anymore. But what the media has done is said, hey, guess what, guys? It's all right to attack the Muslim lady with the hijab. So it's just gone in different waves where we get it silently, they get it more loudly, depending on what origins we're from. Nevertheless, still as poisonous and evil and so closed. But I will say this, that Muslim people in the last 10 years have been subjected to the worst types of racism in the UK, and it's absolutely disgusting. And it makes my blood boil.
And the fact that you say that currently black women are not only had to experience all of this open racism a while ago, but now it's microaggressive. And sometimes that's the hardest to catch because it's like they'll just tell you that we did nothing, but it's those little subtle things. And the fact that Muslims are subjected to open racism in the UK, open Islamophobia. Can you tell me the role of the media in all of this? And how they are pushing this racism?
Elisa?
I think it's a lot of it's normalized the way that they portray Muslims. So the media have got such a big role and they have so much potential in what they can do, but they portray Muslims so negatively. It's kind of inevitable in a way of how people have a perception about Muslims. You'll hear when, like, for example, Islamic phrases like Allahu Akbar, they're talked about a lot in as like terrorism related, but they don't actually give it insight of what Islam actually is, which is completely a peaceful religion. And I think the way that they present it is more for a new story, more for an interest, not the actual truth.
Yeah, it's like they profit off, this
Yeah.
racism. And in a capitalist society, almost everything is profitable. So I understand what you're saying. But do you think that there's enough awareness around racism in the UK? Because here in the US, it definitely is not something that's spoke about enough.
No, I don't think there is at all. I think we campaign so much to raise awareness about it. Our protests are there in numbers so we can show people that it is an issue. The media doesn't do its job at all in the slightest, and I think by the youth especially, and people like Natasha, taking power off that and giving people like a voice to speak instead of the media, we're taking control of our own country, of a country that belongs to us, and we're passionate about it. We're not going to sit down anymore and allow it.
And as two young activists, right? Two young empowered women who just seeing you and your stories is just motivating me. But what was it that inspired you guys to get up and actually start advocating against this while so many are just watching passively? What is it that constantly motivates you to do what you do?
I think for me, as I said last week, I was born into racism, and I did a speech, a BLM speech, the first one, and it got a lot of media attention because it took me literally an hour to write this speech because it has been brewing since birth. So I was born into racism, and I was actually adopted out for being a half black child. My grandmother said, get this N baby out the house. My mother was white. So I've had to make peace with all these things, but what I've done is I've turned it into good rather than go down the road that white society want you to go down, which is drugs and prison and being a statistic, especially in America. Yeah, we've seen how we have an increase in crime among Black and brown people. And I refused to go down that route, even though I was in foster care and I was adopted because of my race, because my grandmother said we could not take her in the fold. So I turned it into something very positive. And I keep saying that to you, turn your life weakness into something positive for everyone. And that's what keeps me going. And I knew that education would keep me afloat more than anything else. And I've just climbed up the academic ladder quite naturally because I'm so passionate about human rights and Black and Indigenous human rights mainly. Because of my background and because I know that racism isn't just a word, it actually kills people. It actually ruins people's lives. And I think just when we're talking about the Muslim population in England, I read that it peaked because of the Manchester bombings, remember? So what the media like to do is scapegoat. And I just can't bear that. And as Eliza said, we need more people to rise and actually be positive voices and say, well, no, this is not in my name at all. And the media are twisting this all out. And we're not all in prison. We're not all trying to blow things up. We're not all mugging you. We're actually educated people and oppressed people. And one of the reasons that we have these symptoms that we have is because we are oppressed people from the white supremacists. And that's it really. So that's what keeps me motivated, and it will do. It's a life journey. It will do till the day I'm an old lady and die.
You said that your story has been brewing since the day you were born. That, Natasha, is powerful. The fact that you were born into racism and your whole life you've been subjected to that racism, that is so powerful that you're using that to do good in your life, to help those who are also less fortunate. So thank you for sharing your story, first of all. And you're definitely right. We are seeing the media scapegoat openly, and we will be speaking more about the role of the media in terms of scapegoating Muslims, Black people, people of color in the UK, as well as the Manchester March, which I do want to get into right after our short break. We're there on Galaxy 19 Satellite, Muslim Network, TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon Apple TV as well. We'll be right back.
Eliza.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Natasha March and Aliza Hamid, who will be right back in a bit. And, Natasha, I want to ask you, what was the turnout of these protests? How did they go? And was it how you anticipated? Were they more than what you anticipated? I want to know how these protests turned out.
Well, firstly, I can't take credit. I just watched the protests go around the world. And doing what I do, a PhD in Black and Indigenous human rights, how colonization affects us, I felt compelled that I would get involved. But then Heba, who's sadly not with us today, set up in Instagram 500 people in 2 days. And then within a week, 11,000. And I just kept messaging her going, listen, please let me get involved. And we met and we created that. It was remarkable. Aliza, what do you think? You were part of that?
Yeah, I actually went to school with Cuba, so we kind of like grew up and we both were passionate about fighting for what's right. We did multiple like sort of fake journalist videos and projects in school, talking about politics, talking about issues around, like we've had it in us, but it was amazing to just see her actually, take that to the real world. And it's like she's an inspiration, even though we're like the same age. She's an inspiration, and I'm inspired by her work. Every single time I talk about racism, it's like I'm doing my job, she's doing her job. It's what we were made to do. So yeah.
And, what effect did these protests, did these marches have? Tell us more about the Manchester March and how it affected people, right? Did they feel more empowered seeing people on the streets demanding justice, demanding equity, and fairness, right? Tell me about the effects of these protests.
Yeah, I think something that racism does is it makes you feel quite, alone, and you feel like no one's experiencing the same thing. You feel it actually can like make you feel quite depressed and low. But when all these people unite together, it's like a one like voice collective. You're all working together. It kind of like gives you sort of sense of togetherness and collective. It's really a wonderful sight to see. You're kind of filled with a sort of passion that you might not have had before, because you're getting listened to, and there's other people who can relate. The protests in particular, when you're marching, the chant that everyone can hear, it kind of like you shout louder, you want people to hear you. You're looking at cars, people might single you out, but you know that they can't do anything. Whereas when you're alone, it's not really like you might not be as empowered. With other people who also believe the same things as you, you're more inspired, and you're definitely more empowered.
Aliza, I think you took me there with you to the protest when you were describing them. How powerful and beautiful, right, of a sight where collectively you have brown and black people who are allies to us coming together and demanding the same exact thing. And you said that you have people watching, but they can't really do anything because collectively we are powerful. But aside from organizing, the Manchester March, these protests, what other work is being done to oppose racism in the UK?
I think, Natasha, do you want to answer that? Or
No, go on, Aliza. No,
I think slowly it's starting to come into schools a little bit more, little by little. Like, it's not really in the curriculum, but I think the more diverse the schools are, the students demand it. So when I went to school, I created these societies where people could talk about it. And I think a lot of it is more with the youth taking over. That's like, I don't really rely on the government to put that into place. Like Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is openly, Islamophobic. So it's like
he's openly racist.
He's literally Trump, I'm telling you.
If you don't have blonde hair, if you don't look like him, he doesn't like you. But on a positive, with people like this, and I keep saying this, on a positive, with blind, like racism, so obvious. It sounds awful to get your head around, but in some ways it's a good thing, because with white people, they don't seem to see racism, and now they can see it, and you can go, well, what has Boris just said about this Muslim lady? What has Boris just said yesterday about refugees? I mean, yesterday was awful. Send them back. Like they're not of this, humanity. And so what's happening now is, fortunately, we can actually use good examples because it's becoming so obvious.
Yeah, before when it was more microaggressive, we couldn't say anything because they would just, you're being dramatic or you're trying to play that victim card. But now you're right. We do have concrete examples. And it's quite sad to be very honest. And I think more people need to rise up against it. So both of you, young activists, young women who are actually raising their voices, what do you think other people in the UK and outside of it perhaps can do to oppose racism?
I think just having an open mind definitely is really important. I think you need to be ready to learn because you're going to have some conversations that will make you feel uncomfortable. You're going to have to talk about issues that might not exactly apply to you. With like, if you're, for example, if you're white, you're going to have to acknowledge your white privilege, which might be uncomfortable, but it needs to be talked about. And talk about deaths that, even if it might be brutal, even if it might make you feel a bit sick or in any way make you feel uncomfortable, you need to talk about it because other people have to experience it. They have to live through it. By you turning a blind eye, by you not listening, that's you showing your privilege anyway, because you don't have to experience it, you know.
You know, I had a young activist who was doing similar things, fights against racism and gun violence. He said to me that ignorance is not bliss, it's violence. And that hit because, you know, for so long I would be like, I would, how does it feel to be privileged enough that I don't even have to think about racism on a day-to-day basis? And then I thought about it and how those who aren't recognizing their privilege, their voices, they're complicit in all of this. And I think, Eliza, what you're saying is very important, that people do need to educate themselves, even if it's uncomfortable. And before we end today, I want to get both of your advice to young people just like yourself who want to get involved from the experience that you guys have from organizing and all of that, both of your last words.
I think the three main things that I keep saying in Manchester, UK is turn up, keep showing up. It's not over. This is the start of change. And as you rightly said, Amina, at the beginning, that we are at the scene in the beginning of a BLM revolution. We won't see even in my son's lifetime. We won't see the end of the decolonizing of the white supremacy, but we are at the beginning. So turn up. The second thing is challenge and educate. If you see racism, challenge it. If you feel it, challenge it. And as a person with many white friends, one thing I'm noticing is that they're trying to argue with me. Even after all my education and I walk in brown skin, they still argue with me. Listen to us. This is our lived experience. And the third thing is, take it upon yourself to set something up. Go to schools, go to workshops, go to your business and say, what are you doing about changing racism in your workplace, in your school place? So they're the three things I would say to do at the moment, to start that seed and turn it into something like a plant, then a tree, and then it's our living lives to eradicate racism.
Definitely. I think what I'd say is, even just now I'm a little bit nervous, but I think it's just about trying to be step out your comfort zone, you know, try to be a little bit brave, and you're not alone. Definitely have a bit of courage. You've got people supporting you. Don't feel like you're, you know, isolated. Even if your family has certain views about racism, try to educate, be ready to learn, like I said before. And I think it's about just applying everything that you already know and taking everything more, or like learning about what's happening everywhere, not only where you are, you know, globally. It's really important. I think what you said as well, Natasha, about just like getting ready to learn and stuff. Definitely.
Yeah.
And I have tremendous amount of respect for both of you. I feel inspired by your stories and by the actions you're doing. And I know, Lisa, you were quite nervous, but I think that you are powerful. And everything you said I was nodding along to it. And you, Natasha, as well, as an educated, strong woman, I think I look up to you for that. So thank you to both of you for having this informative with us today. And thank you for listening in. Hopefully you can educate yourself and go out and educate other people as well. And thank you guys for being with us.
And thank you so much. Thank you for having me on the show to talk about these things. And we just need to keep doing stuff. What you're doing is exactly what we need to keep doing. This show, it's wonderful. You know, these shows popping up of young people, young women, so eloquent, so intelligent, and just these shows make my day. I'll be thinking about this for a week, because this is the kind of thing we don't need mainstream television. We need shows like this to pop up, and people will learn, and then this show will be shared. Forget mainstream, because it's all lies anyway. This is truth. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel honored to be here as well. So
definitely.
Yeah. And I love what you said, Natasha. Forget mainstream. We need to create our own platforms, and that's exactly what NextGen is. So that's just me giving a little, like, you know, hyping up my show. But it's nice to hear that.
Forget mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Who wants to be mainstream? It's so 90s.
Yeah. So thank you so much, both of you. Thank you to our audience once again. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.